Bilinguals of Reddit, what's your they didn't know I spoke their language story. Late to the party, but once when I was younger I went to the park with my sister. We look very white and no one would know both of us to speak Mandarin fluently unless we told them. Some money must have fallen out of my sister's pocket, and in Mandarin we hear a mother talking to her daughter and telling her not to let us know we dropped money so that they could pick it up after we left. Both of us turned around straight away and my sister picked up her money while both of us gave them dirty looks, and we changed our conversation to Mandarin. The look of horror on both of their faces will forever be burned into my head. A white friend of mine lived in China for a couple years and now is back in the US. We were on vacation and he got excited when he saw this little Chinese shop and wanted to look for groceries he can't find elsewhere. Two ladies were speaking Mandarin behind the counter as we entered, and so he greeted them with something like "good morning" in Mandarin. Assuming he wasn't fluent, one said something to the other in Mandarin roughly like, "Look at the silly gringo who thinks he can speak Mandarin." As he is completely fluent, he was able to quip back in Mandarin like, "Ah, you shouldn't be so quick to assume that people in here won't understand what you're saying." Her friend's laugh was hilarious. He did buy a couple items and they seemed to immediately like him once he demonstrated he was fluent. He had to explain the conversation to me after we left, as I know no Mandarin at all and was curious why the one lady seemed to be cackling at her friend. Visiting South Korea with my wife, a native of that country. I'm shaped like a lumberjack, and have a big, red lumberjack beard to match. A group of Korean women in their 50s and 60s nearby were laughing and calling me a bear, which I found hilarious. So one of the older ones says, "Gum, bear," to me as she passes by, and I start laughing. She makes that face like, "Did he understand what just I said?" So I raise my arms and make a playful growl at her. She is horrified and starts apologizing while her friends all cover their mouths and giggle, as Korean women customarily do. I love Korea. See, I wish people could do this, rather than talking actually shit. This is cute and hilarious. One of my favorite stories in this thread. I think because it doesn't seem sorta malicious compared to a lot stories here, like they didn't really mean anything bad by it, just an observation: you are big and hairy. I'm a white guy who lived in Senegal for 11 years. As such, I learned quite a bit of Wolof, the local language. 99% of white people here don't, because they aren't there that long. Anyways, there were a few times that people were talking about me or to me in Wolof without knowing I understood them. Once there was a group of teens at the beach and one of them greeted me with a Wolof insult for white people, "red ears," but he said it in a nice way, as if I wouldn't know he was insulting me. He kept talking to me in Wolof and I responded in French that I don't understand, while in actuality I understood very well. After a minute I had enough and said in Wolof, "Okay, I'm going, I'll see you around, black ears." His friends had a big laugh and I moved on. I can guess why red ears is an insult. See rednecks. Is black ears also an insult? Or is it just you acknowledging the insult? Black ears is not an insult, since most white people don't speak Wolof and wouldn't even know how to say it. I was just doing as you say, letting them know I understood. Senegal has a bit of a culture of teasing, so I knew I could insult back with no worries. I worked as a part-time clothing model for a while in an Arab country. I am Arab but I don't look like it apparently. Anyways, we had to walk around this convention and show the clothes, wearing heels on a carpet floor. I was young, around 16, I didn't know how to walk really well in heels yet, and the carpet floors didn't help either. The women there didn't know I spoke Arabic and started making fun of how I'm walking. I went up to them and asked them where the bathroom was in Arabic. They looked so surprised and embarrassed at the same time. It was lovely. When I was at university, I had a lot of friends that spoke Arabic. They would often go off on tangents in Arabic when I'm the only one who couldn't understand. I would never claim to be fluent, but I spent a lot of time learning Arabic on my own and from a close friend from Kuwait. I would catch things here and there and try to interject into the conversation. Obviously learned all of the bad words and could catch those pretty easily, so I knew if someone was talking shit. Everyone was always surprised when I would say something and get a pretty good laugh. I would imagine because I'm sure my Arabic was very broken in pronunciation, but also that a redneck-looking white guy from Wyoming in cowboy boots was speaking Arabic. Clothing modeling in Arab countries doesn't sound like a hoot and a half. Are there any social issues you face? I used to work as a dealer in a casino where our biggest richest clients were Chinese. I don't look Chinese, but I could understand and speak it. Sitting down on my table, they thought it was safe to discuss techniques to be sneaky behind my back, and also talk about me a little. I'm a young girl, so I got some creepy remarks. They never understood how they never got away with things, as I never made any indication I understood them. How would you stop them from doing their sneaky things? Do you have specific examples? Just curious, not doubtful. I don't know what kind of dealer she is, but if it's blackjack and they were counting cards, the casino would likely ban them for style of play. If they were playing poker, I'd be surprised they were allowed to speak Chinese at the poker table. Many casinos require players to only speak English to avoid cheating. Same reason most places won't let you use a cell phone at the table. Most Chinese expats that play locally seem to prefer Paiga or Baccarat. I know nothing about those games, enough that they consider those tables theirs and try to get people outside their community to leave if they try to play too. LOL. I'm a dealer at a casino in Canada, but we have our thusser tables too. Fully packed of Asians that speak another language to cheat. They get one warning, after that they are out. Teacher here. Had a student with serious issues concerning authority. Essentially, he would cuss out nearly anyone who tried to tell him what to do with every name in the book. One day, he thought he'd get creative in starting swearing in Spanish to avoid consequences and called me basically the equivalent of a wrinkly ball sack. Long story short, I would pay to have a picture of his face when I replied, in fluent Spanish, that he was going to call his mother and repeat what he had just said. I'm Chinese, but I also speak English and Spanish, and if this kid really thought Spanish was a good choice of obscure language others wouldn't understand, wow, he's lacking some common sense. LMAO. Mandarin, English, and Spanish are quite possibly the worst choices if you are trying to say something without others understanding. Especially depending on area. Talking in shit in Spanish about white people while in the American Southwest? Yeah, dumbass. They probably understand you. Even if they don't speak Spanish, they all know the bad words, and more of them are fluent than you realize. Even in less obvious areas, Spanish is definitely not obscure. I'm a white teacher in rural Canada. I live in an area with like no Hispanic people, and I have no background in Spanish other than what I've heard on American TV, and even I knew when a Mexican exchange student was swearing at me. LOL. I had a teacher that spoke Spanish call out a student for being too PDAY with her boyfriend. I didn't need to understand what he said, the look on her face was priceless. Did this kid already speak Spanish, or did he just learn the Spanish curse words? In Quebec on a ski trip, a bus hit my dad's car while trying to park. My dad got onto the bus and started talking to the driver. The driver was quite apologetic, but when my dad started asking for his insurance information, he all of a sudden couldn't speak English. Without skipping a beat, Dad switches to interrogating the driver in French, the language he did all of his education until university. Driver was shook. I will never understand why anyone in Canada ever considers French a foreign language. So I was living in Barcelona dating a Swedish girl about 10 years ago, and I got really into studying Swedish and watching Swedish films and learning vocabulary and stuff. So we went on vacation to Portugal with her roommate over the summer, and we're on the beach. I'm listening to a conversation that they're having between themselves, and honestly not understanding much of it. But then, in this moment of pure clarity, I heard my girlfriend say, "Sometimes I look at him and I just think, why?" Oh man, I confronted her about it, and I've never seen someone turn so red in my life. Sometimes I look at him and I just think, why? Another language, oof. I look mixed. I'm full Cambodian, but I've been confused with being mixed with black. When I was 7, I went with my mom to her doctor in Long Beach, which is mainly Cambodian populated in that area. My mom went inside her doctor's office, leaving me in the waiting room. As soon as the office door closed, these two old Cambodian ladies start talking shit in Khmer, saying how she's a single mom, she's not, and how she had a black baby, me, and that's such a shame BC she made my life miserable. They also said my skin color was ugly and I had a black nose, etc. I just sat quietly, looking at them until one realized, oh snap, maybe she understands Khmer, and asks me, hey, do you know your dad? And I just replied back in our language, yeah, and he's at home waiting for us. And we have the same skin color, so that means yours is ugly too. Both of their faces dropped. It was great, and they had the audacity to tell my mom that I was rude when she came out. I wasn't the bilingual one, but my bilingual friend was really the star of the show. I am a straight guy and my bilingual friend is gay. We were in college for summer school 20 plus years ago, and everyone taking classes stayed in the same old dormitory. It was a school with a lot of international students who had even greater representation in the summer because they typically didn't fly home for just 3 months. My friend had a computer, I didn't, so he told me I could go into his room anytime and use it if he didn't need it at the time. My friend was white, but had spent a number of his childhood years in Japan and spoke Japanese like a native. We were talking and walking down the hall toward his room, and two Japanese exchange students began talking to one another in Japanese, looking at us and snickering. My friend looks over and starts dressing them down in absolute perfect Japanese, and they are horrifically embarrassed. They began profusely apologizing and hurriedly walking away. I turned to my buddy, what did they say? They were making some disparaging remarks about your sex life, so I told them they were wrong and not to be rude, he said. Then he quipped, they were making some disparaging remarks about my sex life, too, but those were all true. They were making some disparaging remarks about my sex life, too, but those were all true. Your friend seems like an absolutely wonderful person. Second comment to make me laugh today, face with tears of joy. Edit, this was the first time I've ever been upvoted like this. Thank you so much. I'm an American and English-German bilingual. My high school hosted some exchange students from Austria. My family hosted a student. We were the only German-speaking host family. None of the exchange students except the one living at my house knew I know German. Americans are notoriously bad at foreign language, so the Austrians assumed I was monolingual. Anyway, I was hanging out with some of the exchange students and other hosts, and one of the Austrian kids told a joke to the other Austrians in German. I laughed. He asked, why are you laughing? You're just laughing because we're laughing, my exchange student said. No, she knows German. Jock, ich verstehe alles, I confirmed. Oh shit, now we can't trash talk the Americans anymore. Verstehen means understand, right? So that sentence means yes, I understood it all. This happened in HS. My homeroom teacher sent me to the principal's office with some paperwork that was requested. As I walk in, I see this one guy in the principal's office, tall black dude, we'll call him Mr. J, and he is speaking fluent Spanish with the Spanish teacher. I drop off the papers with the secretary and go back to class. It's almost end of day and I'm in my English class and we have a substitute teacher, Mr. J. Well, kids being kids, no one is listening to him, and one of my classmates, Millie, who's sitting on the other side of the room from me, starts bad-mouthing him in Spanish to 3 other girls. I kept telling her to shut up, but she wouldn't listen and just went on and on. He heard me try to warn her and motioned for me to stop, so I stopped. And that's when he began talking back to her in Spanish. I didn't say a thing, and the whole class died laughing. Millie then began to yell at me for not warning her, and Mr. J told her, she tried to warn you but you didn't listen. She and the other girls got detention for about a week. It's a reverse of this actually. I didn't know they spoke my language. I asked my mom in Vietnamese if I could have the Mexican ice cream near checkout. That shit is the best thing ever, Anne was begging her since she thought I had too many sweets. This older white man turns around and says it's pretty good ice cream, in our language. Me and my mom blankly stared at him in awe. It was the first time I've ever heard a white man speak Vietnamese. It wasn't flawless, but I could understand him. It was actually pretty freaking great. He noticed our faces and was just like, yeah, my wife's family does the same, face with tears of joy. I would totally do that if I married a Vietnamese woman, but the completely different phonetics and unique inflection are really intimidating. My mom is Vietnamese, and despite her teaching me the language, it still took me several years to become good at speaking it. That's the thing that's most impressive. I speak pretty good Thai for a Westerner. I am able to pick it up and repeat it back with little to no issue. Vietnamese? Oh fuck no. The way that it sounds in the throat, even a simple gammon, thank you, is such a struggle for people to understand when I say it. I'm fairly tattooed and I was working in retail, in a shoe shop. I was serving a very rude woman and her daughter, both of whom clearly thought they were better than me, and every time they asked for shoes they told me, in English, that I was very slow to fetch them and bad at my job. I was only on like my third shift. The atmosphere turned pretty sour because obviously they were being rude and it annoyed me, and as I was boxing up the shoes they wanted, the mother turned and said to her daughter something like, "Don't ever get tattoos, this is the kind of person that has them." Working in retail with absolutely no brains and tattoos reflect that, blah 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 in Italian. I simply replied, "Non sono d'accordo, ma grazie, I disagree, but thank you." She looked absolutely humiliated and quickly left. I have 2 German girls in my class and they usually talk German to each other. I figured out that one of them understood Dutch, since one of them laughed after I told a joke to another Dutchman, but they didn't figure out that I could understand German. I heard them gossip all the time about people in our year. In the beginning of this year I got assigned to a group with them and they were talking about a teaching being a dumbass, so I joined in. They were shocked at first, but we had a good laugh afterwards. We're good friends now. An American family was commenting on people on public transport in my city, Nordic. Everyone understood them. It went on for a few moments before some local kids, 10-13, started commenting back. "Yeah, he does look rough, but it's us you really gotta watch out for, we grew up in the hood," and so on. Love those kids. Edit, I should add, this doesn't represent most American tourists and certainly not most Americans. Just happen to be Americans this time. Isn't it really well known that almost everyone in the Nordic countries speaks English? To regular people, sure, not so much America's most prized intellectuals like this family. As said best by a random American dude in Vienna airport. "Honey, we are the laughingstock of the international community." I was once stuck in between 2 people at an airport in Berlin. We were riding this train thing from one plane to another. Anyway, I'm just there in the back, minding my own business, and they suddenly start talking about condoms, and I'm forced to listen. Pro tip, people speak English in Western Europe. To be honest, when an American travel, the reception I get most often is that Europeans think that Americans think that everybody hates them, as in, Americans are paranoid about being hated, and Europeans are aware of this. There are morons everywhere, or just the loudest morons. Sort of ish. Some people automatically assume everyone speaks English, some automatically assume no one speaks English. When I was in Amsterdam, a local in a shop I was in was surprised that I was not surprised they spoke English without a problem. I'm surprised that they were surprised. Every Dutch person I've ever known has been trilingual at least. One Dutch less I knew spoke 5 languages fluently. Shitty tourists like that make me embarrassed as an American. They go over to your place representing my country and don't have the decency to be polite and courteous. Absolute bullshit. It happens to all nationalities, my friend. Don't be embarrassed. Most Americans are wonderful, and I say that having lived in Indiana. I don't really have that good of a story, but the faces were pretty funny. I studied abroad and got a minor in Spanish, so I can understand most spoken Spanish and definitely understand it when reading. I'm just very slow at speaking at this point since I'm so out of practice. A couple weeks ago at work I was warming up my breakfast when I hear two women speaking to each other in Spanish, that they needed to call maintenance because the coffee machine was broken. Without really thinking I said, but in English, it's not broken, it just needs a new filter, that's what the error message said, and they both just stared at me. Something similar happened at my house when I was having a pest control treatment done. Two of the workers were talking to each other in Spanish and I heard them say I can't find the attic stairs. So I said oh they're right here, and then when I walked away I heard them discussing if I spoke Spanish or not. I did usually keep that under wraps so I'd be able to hear what people were saying when working on my home. I like to know the truth, and a lot of times people thinking I don't speak their language is a good way to get that. I live in Texas, so 95% of day laborers will speak Spanish. It's handy to understand what's being said. Had a manager like that. His grandparents spoke only Spanish, but his parents wanted him to know English and wouldn't let him speak Spanish at home. If you asked him a question in Spanish he'd understand but answer in English. Happens to me on the regular. I'm a white person with red hair and green eyes who lives in Japan and works as a translator. I fit the definition of ultra gaijin, so folks think they can just say whatever they want around me, especially since a lot of people subscribe to the silly stereotype that Japanese is just too hard and impossible for foreigners to learn. I remember when I was an exchange student in uni in Tokyo I was going around a bunch of circles during club fair week to see what was worth joining. One was a conversation club for English, which really pushed foreigners to join and had people constantly smiling and promising friendships and lots of fun get-togethers. I didn't really know anyone in the uni, so I went to their first dinner get-together just so I could make friends. I joined a table with a really gangly white girl who didn't speak any Japanese, and the club senior at our table would compliment her and act super friendly, but then would turn to each other and, still all smiles, talk shit about how freakish she looked or how she smelled awful. I was speaking in English the whole night and sat right next to the girl. Towards the end, when they really started going off, I just turned to them and said oh hey, so what you guys talking about? In Japanese. The color completely drained from their faces. They just laughed awkwardly and stopped talking among each other for the rest of the night. I didn't tell the girl anything, but convinced her the club was lame and we both ended up joining a dance group instead. Annex 200E. I'm an Indian who is fluent in Mandarin and was at a local poker game where two Chinese lads were talking shit about me as I had won some money off of them. Lad A spoke to his pal as Mandarin, watch me wreck this noob by bluffing his arse off and I'm gonna show him the bluff when he folds. It was a rather big pot for me, $1,000 plus, as I was only 18 back then, and I put on a show for him with the size and massive tanking to get him to sweat it out before I made the call with a single pair to take the pot down. He was extremely frustrated and sarcastically told me that I made a next level call. The game ended 2 hours later with me winning over $2,000 plus, and he was the main contributor. It took every shred of discipline not to rub it in his face that I spoke Mandarin, as I wanted to shear this sheep over and over again, which I did over the next few months. Thanks Mr. Whale. When I was in Seoul, I had a hat made that says, which literally means white person in Korean. After leaving that shop, I went to the bus stop where an old Korean man noticed my hat, and was just openly chuckling and enjoying its humor. He even got his equally old friend's attention to point out that someone had tricked the silly white boy to buy a hat that labeled him as a gringo. Then, my bus pulls up, and just before getting on, I turn to them and say what the hat says is true, isn't it? And the 180-degree change in their facial expressions was fantastic. 10/10 would make hat again. Bunch of German teenage girls in Dublin. I'm not a native German speaker, but I've worked in Germany, so my German is pretty good. I was out with some friends and they were sitting behind us in the McDonald's. They were gossiping about the boys in their group and their plans to try and get to their rooms later that night. I'm guessing they were there on a school trip. One girl was rather descriptive in what she wanted to do to one of the boys. When we left I turned to them and said, "Veel space, have fun with that." She literally crawled under the table. I was working summers during college on an assembly line, and there were a lot of Puerto Ricans and Dominicans working in the same factory. I had gotten to be pretty good at speaking and understanding Spanish in my high school classes. One day, one of the mechanics was telling a story to a couple of the women working on the same line I was working on, and the story was funny, so I laughed. All of them turned around and stared at me in shock. When they confirmed that, yes, I did understand Spanish, the mechanic looked at the others and said, "Wow, we better watch what we say around her from now on." Yes, dude, I did hear all the other comments about the college students the last few weeks, and I understood which ones of us you thought were more attractive than the others. It's been decades, so my Spanish is not nearly as good now, but I'm working on that. Brit living in the Netherlands, was on holiday back in England. Two Dutch girls around 19, same age as me at the time, were queuing to pay for their shopping. I was in front of them with like maybe twice their items as I was doing chores for my grandparents, cause they are nice enough to put a roof above my head for the holidays. The girls start talking about how rude I am for being in front of them with more shopping, how a short cunt like me can't carry all that shopping anyway. Then they start talking about Brits in general, calling us ugly and stupid. So I just turned to face them, smiled and said have a nice day in Dutch. And all color drained from their faces. Then after I paid for my items I said sorry it took so long, nice hair again in Dutch. She genuinely had nice hair. I've never seen someone look so damn ashamed of themselves. Anywho, it took me a while to get home cause the bags were heavy and one of the girls came up to me and apologized and thanked me for not getting angry with her. Put a chocolate bar in my shopping and left. I once again said have a nice day in Dutch. She cringed, but after I laughed at her reaction she laughed it off and we went out separate ways. TLDR, girls trash talked me in earshot. I wished them a nice day. They apologized and gave me chocolates. I'm not quite bilingual, but I can definitely understand a fair amount of my mother's native tongue. I would always catch my mom's friends at parties being super judgmental or gossiping about the people who they thought wouldn't understand. Another instance is when I was trying to learn Dutch for an ex and I met his mother's friend who joked and said, "Oh, so this is the girl he's going to marry?" And his mom laughed it off and mumbled to him, "No, I don't think so, not ever." I pretended I didn't understand. Oof, I'm sorry, that's very rude of her. That's really kinda that you are trying to learn their language. Me, multilingual. They did not know it. And X200E, company I worked for, bought a company in Canada. Montreal, specifically. Back in the telecom days. Nobody on our side had done any due diligence. I was sent up to evaluate the effort level of integrating the two systems. The bought company is wonderfully diverse and multinational. I'm sitting in the middle of the conference room, after getting the standard architecture slide deck, and start asking the tough questions. Without boring you with the details, folks to my left start talking in Arabic about all the work they'd have to do to get us an interface. The folks on my right started talking in French about all the back-end work they'd have to do make a viable product. I let the conversation develop for a while. The big boss finally gets the meeting back under control and starts spinning some BS about we'd be ready for interface shortly. I stopped him. I repeated exactly what both teams said and expressed that given what I just heard, there was no way any of the integration would be feasible within any kind of reasonable time frame. There was deathly silence. Finally the big boss says, in English, "Well guys, I think we're going to have to find a language this guy doesn't know if we're going to have private conversations." As it happens, as it goes, we never did get their stuff integrated. Both companies eventually tanked. Edit, a word. Finally the big boss says, in English, "Well guys, I think we're going to have to find a language this guy doesn't know if we're going to have private conversations. Or, just do your due diligence so private conversations about how much of a shit show this is gonna be don't have to happen." My parents never enforced us to speak Arabic at home. But growing up around it I can understand it just fine. Understanding a language is way easier than speaking it. Speaking is something that requires much more practice to the point where it becomes a reflex. Anyway, I'm 25 years old. My entire family still think I don't understand what they're saying. They think I only know a few words. Over the years I knew what I was getting for Christmas. I knew when they were shit-talking about people. I heard them talking about private family matters that they didn't want my brothers and I to know about. Sometimes it was fun. Other times it was kinda sad finding out family secrets. I grew up in Japan and was raised by a Japanese stepmother, but I am white. I went to elementary school on an American airbase, and almost every year we would have a field trip to visit a Japanese school off base. It was just the thing to do. I remember one time I got into a class with two rude kids who were saying awful things about me, like he's so fat. Americans are so disgusting, he looks like a pig, they get bad educations, we'll be surprised if he can do origami, etc, etc, etc. They were like that the whole day. The teachers didn't really do anything about it and only told them to shut up when they were being disruptive. Towards the end of the day, as I was on my way out of the class to go back to my school, I thanked the teacher in my best formal Japanese for his time and for hosting me. Then thanked my student host who I was assigned to and told the rude fucks that I was glad I wasn't paired up them. I think I saw several people die inside that day and it was delicious. On a plane, besides two Hispanic men who made a comment about how much of a nerd I looked like and how dorky white folks are. Proceeded to spend the next 4 hours listening to these two beefheads complaining about everything under the sun. This included no small amount of mean-spirited comments on how I was so overdressed and it was a good thing that I couldn't understand them. I didn't make as much as a single peep. No sir, I stayed as silent as an awkward giraffe trying to blend into the wall at a party for elephants because I knew it wasn't my place. I would play the long game, even if it meant staring out the window for 4 hours straight. I had my plan set in motion. As we began to exit the plane, I asked my clueless neighbors, in crystal clear Spanish, of course, if they could pass me my bag from the overhead bin, and also casually mentioned that I am a translator. The color slowly drained from their faces as they realized that every time they had made snide comments about everyone on the plane, or talked about their STD problems and a variety of other topics, I had understood it all. If I could only bottle that expression and sell it, if only. I could put the horror movie industry out of business if I could only sell pure vials of the concentrated dread those fellows showed on their faces in that moment, I tell you. But, in all seriousness, there are so many people in the US that are fluent in both English and Spanish that one should never assume one can speak in Spanish to keep their discussion private. Imagine not being able to talk in private. This post was made by the language I made up in first grade, gang. I'm as Puerto Rican as they come, but my skin tone isn't brown F. I get asked by other Puerto Ricans Hispanics if I'm Latino or not, let's just put it that way. I work in a hospital and whenever someone asks me if I understand Spanish I always tell them no. I've learned that giving people any hint at the fact that I can understand makes me the target for a rant or a bitch fest. It's gotten to the point where I can tell based solely on how they ask me the question. I've heard a few things in my day. A few weeks ago I ran into a patient who was cursing out his nurses in Spanish. The reason was that they weren't giving him the information he needs about his health. They kept blowing him off, but it wasn't on purpose. They didn't have any updates at the time and he was being a real pain in the ass. He had to wait. He's not going to get the results of his tests in 10 minutes. So as I walked by I hear him say in a nice way to a nurse, I can't stand you. You are so useless, it's sad, ... He said it in Spanish. I turned to him and said in English, they aren't useless. You are just acting entitled. He got real quiet after that. And X200E, and X200E. Same. I look Indian according to others even though I am Hispanic, and when I worked in retail, I pretended not to know Spanish sometimes based on the customer. Sometimes the customer was struggling like my parents whose English is broken, so I would help. But others they took advantage and made us their personal shoppers while being rude. And X200E, edit, English not Spanish. Had this old fat lady come into my store a week ago. I work at a 7-Eleven, now she has two small kids and is talking to them in Spanish. She says hi to me in English. As I am ringing her up, she tells her kids in Spanish, remember to always stay out of the sun, or else you're going to end up dark as her. Now I DK who this bitch thinks she is, but I said in Spanish, at least there is an earthquake whenever I walk. She was pissed and walked out without paying. Why would she even say that? I don't think that it is how getting a tan works. This is why I want to learn to Spanish. Dennis. The racism is crazy. I remember my PR stepdad used to call black people the hard R, but married my family, so anyway, I wanna own people just like this. No, you can't own them anymore. You should just learn to speak the language so you can fire back at them. There was a deaf lady ordering at the Domino's I work at. She had her daughter interpret her sign language for her, but her daughter ran off and did something else before the lady could finish ordering. I then let her know that I speak some sign language and finished taking her order. She seemed genuinely surprised that I spoke sign language, and told me she was pleased to be able to speak, or rather, sign, for herself. We even carried on conversation about the city, as she was new and wanted to know more about the area. It was a really nice experience, and a nice change from the usual rude customers we get there. I have a few, but this is one of my fave. I am Filipino but knows how to speak English, Tagalog and Ilonggo, a dialect in the Phil. Funny part, this happened while me and bro was visiting Korea. We are on our way for a night out, so we were both dressed up in suits. And two ladies walking from our opposite direction saw us and decided to speak in their dialect, which happens to be the dialect I speak. She said me and her friend should wrestle together jokingly, meaning we should be intimate. Well, little did she know I understood it. Looked her in the eye and told her that I would take her friend out for dinner first and then wrestle afterwards in the dialect they spoke. Edit, to those wondering what happened afterwards. Well, in their embarrassment they booked it. I would have if they stayed and talked. But me and my bro had other things planned, so didn't really chase them. So, not actually bilingual, but I learned to say the sentence, I understood what you said, and it was very offensive, and the word fat, as in, a person, in Mandarin and Cantonese. I used to be very overweight, and loved Chinese food. Anytime I would go to a new place, I'd order a lot of food, typically in those buffet-style to-go places where they scoop your food down a line. And listen for the magic word. If I heard it, I'd throw my one line that I knew at them. Got me 20 free meals with complimentary profuse apology over the course of 3 or so years. And the more free meals you get, the fatter you get, so the more people will talk shit about you, so the more free meals you get. My god, it's the perfect crime. I was in a hostel in NZ standing in the kitchen, when two German teens next to me had a wild discussion about what is going wrong in their relationship. Apparently they travel together but were in some kind of hey we do somehow feel naughty when we see each other but it's also kinda awkward and we don't know what's going on between us at this point situation. Dude had like a public meltdown and she was playing let's pretend I'm super angry and I don't care what he says but actually I'm obviously shaken because this is all too much for me. Then he asked me to give him the salt and I faked a French accent. Zero mon ami, I also speak French, and gave him the salt is to not blow my cover. So you speak at least 3 languages. Impressive. I mean, assuming the lovebirds were speaking German. In Austria, where my German family and I were touring, we stopped at a big visitor's stop to get a tire on my cousin's car fixed. My mom brought us inside to eat while we waited, and while standing in line, 2 grown men behind me began commenting on how I looked in my shorts. I was 14/15 at the time. I guess they'd heard me speaking English to my mother and didn't know that I speak and understand German, particularly the dialect of it that is closest to how Austrians speak German. I don't say anything because I'm nervous, but eventually I turn around and say to them in German, I'm still deciding what I want, you guys can go ahead of me. They both looked very nervous and ended up ordering and immediately rushing out. Not me, but a good friend of mine. She was born with a vestigial arm. It's only as long as maybe half a bicep and has 2 little wonky finger-like protrusions. Her first language until she was 5 was Spanish and speaks perfect English with no hint of an accent. She has a very fair complexion and straight blonde hair. Doesn't look anything like a stereotypical Mexican woman. She also teaches kindergarten. One year, she was introducing herself to parents of new students and one of the fathers made a comment, in Spanish, about the cripple, so she responded, in English, about how her disability doesn't impact her ability to teach this guy's child. Working in construction. My friend was making fun of some black dude in Spanish and kept being racist and towards him. I kept telling him to stop, but he kept on going for a while. After a few hours on the job, the black dude comes to us and politely tells us in Spanish that he understood everything that my friend was saying and that he was no Afro-American. He told us that he was from Panama and he was Latinum just like us. My friend apologized to the man and I was just laughing and telling my friend how stupid he was. Edit, corrected my grammar, no more fried amigos. In Russia, locals either assume you don't speak the language or just don't care. My friends and I were in a restaurant in St. Petersburg trying to figure out if we needed to seat ourselves or wait for a hostess, when a group of men started making fun of us. We had been in Russia for about 2 months and were fairly tired of being called stupid foreigners, so we turned and let them have it. One guy dropped his fork. It was very satisfying. I was in Spain for an internship. I'm Lebanese, so as we mostly are, I'm trilingual, Arabic, French, and English. The town I was in is coastal and had a lot of Algerians in it because of the proximity. Algerians also heavily use French along with their local dialect, so this is a double gotcha. One night I was at a street market looking for souvenirs. I was in one of the kiosks looking at fans and a group of 3 men were next to me speaking Arabic. At that point I was used to hearing it there, so I didn't really pay attention. I also think it's fair to mention that I'm extremely white passing. One of the guys speaks to me in English about which fan he thinks is prettier, etc., meaning I had to turn and look at him to respond. At that point his friend screams in Arabic, tell her I would give her my heart and soul, and the other says that face. I just dropped the fan in place, made eye contact, said astaghfirullah. Literal translation is asking God for forgiveness, but it's used to portray frustration and dismay at something, and I walked away. Never saw someone be this shocked and turn colorless in my life. Edit, reworded translation to reflect the situation better, lol. What did he mean by, what is that face? Also, I love that word and will try to work it into my vocabulary. Oh haha, you in a way complimenting my face. Didn't even realize how weird it sounds in English until I reread it. I reworded it. Had to read the responses to understand that you are a girl and that is why they said that. I just assume everyone on the internet is a man. Not long ago my girlfriend and I went to visit Paris. At one point we were taking this public long-distance bus. There is a normal queue area, but my girlfriend and I, along with some French family, were running late. Instead of walking the entire winding queue with no one in it, we step over one chain and are walking to the bus no problem. That's when I hear the father tell his 2 boys what I could best translate as never be like these unmannerly, lazy Americans, they're all useless. I was shocked that someone could be teaching their children these things. I didn't reply as to not start shit, but this story, and other experiences from France have taught me the French are not kind people. Edit, should mention that I'm French Canadian and my girlfriend is from the Dominican Republic, not Americans. Edit 2, I had plenty of good experiences in France too, but France has had the rudest examples in my experiences. I was casually sitting in science class, during a free period, minding my own business, when this attention seeker walks over to me and proceeds with small talk. So, you know Polish, yeah, how do you say fucking Polish? Krowika. He proceeded to shout Krowika out at the entire classroom, and named people the words I told him were supposedly swearing. What he didn't know. The girl who sat next to me also knew Polish, and was laughing her ass off for a reason. Krowika means baby cow. I'm a white passing Hispanic girl who works in an all-Hispanic salon. All too often guys will come in and talk shit about the gringa and how she won't know what to do, etc. Then I ask them if they're ready for their haircut and speak nothing but fluent Spanish to them the whole time. Most speak worse Spanish than me despite them looking more Hispanic. We come in more shades than just brown, and you'd figure my own people would realize that. I was in the lift with a mate, just standing shoulder to shoulder facing the door. We stop after a few floors, and a girl and her boyfriend quickly shuffle in. The girl stood to my right, my friend to my left. She glanced sideways and up at me a few times, each growing a bit more bold and looking at me a little longer. She then, quite audibly, looked at her boyfriend and surprisingly emphatically told him, "Wow, he's really handsome." I didn't say a word until we got to our floor, and before stepping forward and out of the lift, I looked her dead in the eye and replied honestly, "You're really pretty too. I've never seen somebody turn deep red so quickly." Her boyfriend starts belly laughing so loud that the people outside the lift were looking over to find out what was going on. I just strode off without even glancing sideways. We lived in Kiribati for a couple of years when I was a kid. It's a group of Melanesian islands on the equator north of New Zealand. My little sister was about 2 at the time and had blonde hair, blue eyes and porcelain skin. We were visiting on one of the more rural islands where the immigrants, white people, rarely went, and I'm sure some of them had never met one before. Some ladies were sitting around chatting and one of them compared my sister to a doll, a reasonable comparison to be fair, and my sister turned around and loudly proclaimed "not doll, I'm insert name here," and I, Kiribati to a bunch of temporarily thunderstruck women who proceeded to burst into laughter. I was visiting the Netherlands after a 15-year residency there with my girlfriend who is English. Now Dutch and English people look quite similar as they are both primary white countries and I am a beautiful big-bearded hairy Kurtishman. As we were sitting on the bus and mind you this guy was eating a kebab of all foods to be racist while eating said the following to the man next to him, "It is always a shame when I see our," implying any white woman, "girls date those dirty Turks," and I went off. Turned around and these two men look like they live off benefits and I said something along the lines of "If we never came to this country you wouldn't be scarging on that kebab you old bastard," and sat back down as if nothing happened, then explained to my girlfriend staring at me like I was some sort of psychopath what the man just said and she burst out laughing. This was the first time I called out someone being racist to me and it felt quite good to say the least. Even though my insult wasn't the best, it was good enough for me. This is the other way round. When we were children my sisters and I were visiting a family friend's house with our mom. We were in the living room chatting away about 2 girls who were twins that we assumed did not speak our language. After 2 minutes or so we saw the girls look uncomfortable and their faces turn bright red. Shortly afterwards their mom came down and spoke to them in our language. We felt terrible. Moving out of a loft apartment and procrastinated with the last of it. Landlord had 2 Polish girls come in and clean while I packed away the final items. I am fluent in Polish, but did not say a word. I overheard them talk about boyfriends, fucking in graphic detail, etc. the whole time. When they were about to drive off, I ran down to tip them. They did a great job, and said thank you and goodbye in Polish. The looks on their faces was priceless. Not me, my mom. She speaks almost exclusively English but can understand a fair amount of Cantonese and can read a few common characters. We were in an almost deserted but very large Chinese restaurant in a neighborhood we are familiar with but don't frequent. The food is decent but we don't finish so my mom asks for some takeout boxes to pack up the food. The waitress comes back with 2 tiny boxes that were obviously not enough for the amount we had left over. There are giant stacks of these boxes on the back wall near the kitchen so my mom asks for a few of the larger ones. The waitress kinda rolls her eyes, leaves and grabs a few of those in a plastic bag. She puts them on the table and immediately starts squawking to one of the other waitresses sitting a few tables away from us folding 1 ton. My mom leans over and says that the one yelling is telling the other to charge us for the boxes. Sure enough, the angry one comes back with the bill and mom sees a 10-cent charge for each box amongst the scribbled out Chinese characters. She then calmly, but firmly says, "I heard what you said. I will not be paying you for the boxes, I will not leave a tip, and we will never come back." She put cash on the table for the exact amount, minus the charge for the boxes. We got up, and left. The look on the waitress' face was priceless, as though she had been quite accidentally confessing to murder. I never thought of my mom as a badass, but I definitely thought she was that day. Not really, they didn't know I spoke their language situation, more like they thought I barely understand them. Every once in a while I meet an airman who thinks locals have a limited understanding of English. Where I live, mostly farmers or close relatives barely speak English, young or new. I am more of a city guy, indoors cat. What happened was one of the first times I met the new guy, we were at a barbecue and we struck a small conversation. He was talking normally and not really dumbing it down, but he found himself explaining meanings and expressions because he thought I didn't know, so he started simplifying and explaining most things he said. My genius idea was to fuck with him and slowly dumb down my knowledge of the English language and slip my accent to a local one and make my Dumb and Dumber face. It got to one point where he had to explain an expression but he couldn't find the right words. That's when my brain kicked into overdrive and I explained it and spoke in a normal accent while slowly raising a big fucking grin. He shut up and looked at me with the most "Are you fucking with me?" face, picked and webpage. He then said, "You asshole," and I giggled like Ron Swanson. Later, at the table, we all sat down and he shouted, "Your son's an asshole." My mom was there, she works with him. This happened late November 2017, he left early December 2018. Great guy. For those thinking I was being a real prick, I was not. I act like an ass towards every closer airman in different ways. It's good banter and we all laugh. Went to an Asian grocery shop, where the cashier was on Skype with his friend talking shit about me, when I bought only a can of soda. He told the other guy on Skype, "Fucking Chinese guy is buying only a can of soda, how can I make a living on this?" So I told him in our language, "I think that if you spend less time on Skype calls, maybe you will make more profit on customers." The cashier was so confused after that. I'm a Westerner living in Thailand. My Thai is far from fluent, but it's decent. Most Westerners here do not speak Thai. I was once sitting in the waiting room at my lawyer's office. He handles retirement visas, so a lot of his clients are old foreigners. I overheard two of the girls in the office chatting about me in Thai. I kept mum, of course. "Oh, look at him, he's so young and handsome, you should catch him, Pooey, foreigners have big dicks." "I know you like that." I managed to keep a straight face until I was leaving the office. In my way out, I said in carefully rehearsed Thai, "It's true what you say about foreigners. But I'm already married." "Sorry, Miss Pooey." The looks on their faces was most satisfying. Now when I go in, I hear, "Look out. This one speaks Thai." Not my story, but my cousin's. She was dating a guy from Colombia and she is a completely white Midwestern gal. They were in Florida and he took her out to a club and someone at the door was speaking to him in their native language and they left without going in. Little did he know my cousin took more than enough Spanish in school to figure out why they left. The guy at the door said something about that they shouldn't go inside because his other woman was in there. That was pretty much the end of that relationship. Edit, I meant Colombia, not Colombia. My French was much better in high school college than it is now. I was also lucky enough to have a fluent friend who taught me all the dirty shit they won't tell you in school. It served me well when my family and I were at Disney World one year. I was wearing a short dress on the day we went to Epcot. In the France Pavilion gift shop, some of the French staff, young people who came over from France to work cultural exchange, were looking at me and commenting loudly about my appearance. Only they spoke in French, assuming the dumb American didn't understand. Stuff along the lines of, "Look at that dress, OMG what a slut," so I told their manager what I'd heard. The poor woman was so embarrassed. While I walked out of the shop with armloads of expensive products the manager had showered on me and the family for free, the gossipy staff got absolutely screamed at by their mortified boss. This happened in Italy one summer. A couple of my friends from grad school came to visit. We were walking through a well-known piazza speaking in English to one another when we hear these guys in a group start talking about us. We are all fluent speakers. One asked, "Which do you prefer, the one in the yellow or the one in the white?" I felt horrible because it was insulting to be compared like that, but also because of the insinuation of not including my other friend. I typically don't engage in these confrontations, it's not worth it to me, but my friend in yellow whipped around and told them, what does it matter? It's not like we would ever consider any of you. Yeah, those guys got laughed at. I'm Latin but born, raised and grew up in Canada. Often when I travel to Latin countries, tourists see me as a local, which is so interesting. While on vacation in Havana recently, I was stumbling back to my casa. 2 white tourists with the classic big hiker packs were walking the streets, asking Cubans for directions. Few were engaging, partly because they didn't know English, partly because it was late out, partly because sometimes in Cuba as a Cuban it isn't the greatest to speak to a tourist for fear of consequences. They came up to me in Spanish saying, "Excuse me, excuse." When I said what's up in my accented North American English, these 2 people exclaimed, "Oh, thank God." Cheers to those folks from LA. Less eavesdropping story, but I was in Madrid this summer and I ended up seated at the bar of a taberna next to 2 Korean girls. I could hear them chatting in Korean but I wasn't really paying attention to what they were saying. Now, I'm Korean but I'm also super tan, so I get mistaken for anything from Latina to Southeast Asian all the time. Plus, I speak some Spanish, so I just been communicating with the barman in Spanish. At one point I had to go to the bathroom, so I turned to the Korean girl next to me, tapped her shoulder, and asked her in Korean if she could please watch my bag for me as I go to the bathroom, and I swear to God this girl levitated in surprise. As a little backstory, in August 2017, my mom got into a minor accident with a girl who was texting and driving that ruined her beloved '88 Volvo wagon, which had just been registered as an antique only a week before. Nobody hurt, but the car was severely beaten up. It drives but sputters loudly and makes some of the most horrific noises I've ever heard a car make. It's held together by tape now. This will be important information in a second, don't worry. So the story goes like this. One night my mom and I were leaving our local Target when we hear a woman flirting with the guy who is gathering the carriages in Creole. For those who are not in the know, Cape Verdean Creole is a Portuguese-based language spoken by Cape Verdeans. It is very common where I live since we have many Cape Verdean immigrants. My mom notices this woman is gesturing towards our car just a little too much and listens in. And what this woman is saying in English was basically, but not verbatim, "Look at that ugly car, look at how beat up it is, how embarrassing, the people who drive it must be so poor," etc., etc. Here's the thing. My mother is Portuguese and Azorean, but most people don't realize this since most people say she doesn't look the part. She understands Creole just as much as Portuguese, since Portuguese is the base language that makes up the Cape Verdean Creole language. My mom made it very clear that she understood what they said when she went to return the carriage and embarrassed them. Although I didn't hear what she said to them. We're used to comments on our car at this point, but that was one of the more interesting instances. Edit, specified that I was mentioning Cape Verdean Creole since a couple Redditors brought up a very good point in saying that Creole refers to many different languages with many different base languages. The French, ho like crap, are they rude? My parents told me this story. They were staying on a campsite in southern France, and my parents were trying to order something from the menu of a local fast food restaurant. They didn't really manage to form the sentence grammatically correct, but eventually they managed. Then, my dad overhears a convo in a group of people. They were talking shit about my parents, and how they were too stupid to speak French. They laughed at him, thinking they wouldn't be noticed. My dad shot the group the nastiest look, and their smile quickly faded from their faces. And X200E, I got pretty pissed when I heard this, as my dad is fluent in 3 languages. If French isn't one of them, so what? Quick side note, throughout my country, and maybe the rest of Europe too, I'm not sure, it's pretty general to think of the French as chauvinistic and patronizing, so this didn't really help the stereotype. Oh, my folk used to work for a French company. From the perspective of an English, as she used to work in the UK, and she said that they put a mean look if you speak English to them, and equally mean look if you attempt to speak French. I was 17 and traveling by train in southern France. I wanted to reserve a couchette, so I went to the speak to an agent. I explained in my poor French that I don't speak French. I then asked her, "Do you speak English?" She shook her head no. I said, "Voque fala português?" Then I asked her, "Usted habla español?" Nope. I was trying to formulate something in my minimal German when she finally says in fluent English, "What do I want?" I was so pissed. I was on an escalator in Japan and there were two youngish guys behind me. One of them was saying stuff like, "Wow, this guy is tall, I wonder where he's from," and stuff like that. His friend says the guy probably understands Japanese, so stop talking, but he keeps going on. I turn around and say he's right, I do speak Japanese, and the friend just bursts out laughing, while the idiot just looks super embarrassed and mumbles an apology. This is more like we didn't know he spoke our language. During the art class, a guy, 1 or 2 years older than us, comes in to talk to the teacher in English, but not exactly with the most perfect accent. Almost half of the students at my school are from other countries. The girl near me turns to me and says, in Romanian, "What is he speaking?" "Chinese." He turns around and with all the sass in the world says, in Romanian, "It's called English, sweetie, I'm sorry." She turned so red I thought she was going to die of embarrassment. It was funny at the time because she had to learn to stop talking about people behind their backs, but it really affected me. I wasn't speaking English very well at the time, but I was just starting to learn. I heard her and other people laughing at how others spoke English so many times that during the school I completely refused to speak English to anyone. At an English school. Now 2 years passed, and if I didn't stop speaking English at that time, maybe now I wouldn't be so bad at it. I'm still scared to speak to anybody at my new school, and the fact that I suffer from pretty severe social anxiety really doesn't help. I can't pronounce anything correctly because I never said most words, so my mouth doesn't know how to. And because I don't know how, I'm too embarrassed to try and learn. I'm trapped in every days of pain because I have panic attacks every time I have to read something at school. I always sound like I have a frog stuck in my throat. Sometimes I'm actually considering giving up on school, which would be sad as I go to a top grammar school where it's pretty hard to get into and I work my ass off for it. Of course I'm studying science, and art one of them, based objects, because there is no way I could do well in English, but God, I am in pain. I just want to function in school like a normal person, you know. If I miss something or I don't understand, there is no way I could ask anybody about it. I sit alone most of the time. I don't participate in group work and I always just stay there and stare at nothing like a creep while crying on the inside. Not fun. This turned from a funny story to a rant about how people laughing at others resulted in me being unable to function like a real person. I'm a Mexican Filipina. I had just came back from China and went out shopping with my mom, and she decided to go get pedicures. We went into a nail salon and the ladies were all Chinese, and they started commenting on our feet in Chinese, like, "I can't believe I have to clean a Filipino's feet, they're dirty islanders anyways." My mom was pretty oblivious to this and just kept talking to me in Tagalog, and when we were finished and paid at the register, I said, "You were hard to understand at first, but thanks for giving me some listening practice." They started apologizing profusely after that. My mom had asked me what they were saying and I just told her we were talking about their home provinces. I didn't want her to have a bad day. Not my story, but my dad and a Costco cashier's. And he was the dickhead in this situation. My mom was doing a return at Costco and my dad catches up with her after paying for groceries and tells her in Spanish, "Tell this little fatty to hurry up with the cashier right there." Without missing a beat, the cashier replies back in Spanish, "This little fatty is going the fastest she can." To make it worse, my parents lived close to the US-Mexico border in an area that's mostly Hispanic. Why my dad thought he could get away with saying something rude in Spanish is beyond me. Another comment, because I was also on the flip side of this, I was volunteering abroad and the group was a mixed bag of nationalities. In terms of Arabs, it was just me and another guy from my uni, so we got used to shit talking in Arabic. That is until an Egyptian guy got there a couple of weeks later, meaning I fully knew he could understand me, but by force of habit I didn't have my filter on and said to my Arab friend, "New guy is working hard to get with that girl, lol." My friend goes, "Bullet bites." Heck up, understand I was mortified. Good thing he doesn't really get our dialect, lol, so mostly had no idea what I was saying. Mostly mundane stuff. I have heard people shit-talking foreigners, of which I am one, because they never know if someone is just visiting or stayed long-term in a tourist area. But memorable for me is one time waiting for the subway and I have my earbuds in, but the song ended, so I'm searching for another song and two guys next to me are saying things like, "Oh, a foreigner. So pretty. I wish I could date one." "Yeah, but you don't know English." "Yeah, I know, so I can't." If I wasn't so awkward, maybe I would have spoke to them in their language, but I was, and they would have been too. I was probably around 11 or 12 waiting at the airport in Miami back from vacation with my uncle. At the airport they had these train cars to take you around the airport, so we were riding one of those to kill time waiting for our flight. After each stop I was repeating the announcer's little speech, making fun of it, when this woman snarkily goes, "Yeah, but I bet you can't say the Spanish part." So I obviously snapped back with exactly what it said in a perfect Spanish accent, and watched her jaw drop to the floor, seeing this little white boy with blonde hair and blue eyes speaking near perfect Spanish.